First thing I do now, before I even kill the engine, is sit in the cab of my truck and pull up the cameras on my phone, all 4 feeds, one at a time. Living room, kitchen, hallway, back door. I do it in the dark in the gravel lot of a truck stop outside Wichita Falls. I do it in the parking garage at the airport. I did it last week sitting in my own driveway with the headlights still on, and my neighbor walked past and gave me a little wave. And I waved back like a normal person, and then I went right back to checking the feeds before I let myself open the door. That's who I am now. I wasn't always. My name is Russ Tillman. I'm 53 years old, and I run long-haul refrigerated freight out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, mostly the Southern Corridor, sometimes all the way up through Denver and back. Reefer loads. The kind where the temperature in the trailer matters more than just about anything, where you're babysitting a digital readout the whole way because a failed compressor means 40,000 pounds of ruined beef and a phone call you never want to make. It's a good living if you can stand the hours. I'm gone 18, 20 days a month, sometimes more during the holiday push. You learn to live in the cab. You learn which truck stops have the cleanest showers and which diners off which exits won't make you regret the chicken fried steak at 2 in the morning. After my divorce went final 6 years back, I took the money that was left after the lawyers had their fill, and I bought a little brick ranch house in Mansfield, just south of Arlington. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a 1-car garage. I mostly use for storage. A backyard with a chain-link fence and a crepe myrtle that the previous owner had planted too close to the foundation. I knew it was too close. I never moved it. There's a kind of stubbornness that sets in when a house is finally completely yours, where even the mistakes feel like yours to keep. My ex got the house we'd raised the kids in. I got a fresh start and a 30-year note, and honestly, for a while, that felt like the better end of the deal. For about 4 years, it was simple. I'd come home off a run, sleep for 14 hours, mow the lawn, sit on the back porch with a beer and the ball game on the radio, do my laundry, restock the truck, and head back out. My daughter lived up in Frisco with her husband and my 2 grandkids, and I'd see them when the schedule allowed. My son was out in Arizona doing something with software that I never fully understood. The house just sat there waiting for me, and that was the whole point of it. A place that didn't ask anything of me except the mortgage and the occasional gutter cleaning. The first thing that was wrong, and I want to be honest about this because people always ask, was the electric bill. I'm not a man who studies his bills. I'm on autopay for nearly everything, and I let the statements pile up in an email folder I open maybe once a quarter. But in August, sitting at Love's outside Amarillo, I happened to scroll past the notification from the electric company, and the number caught my eye because it was almost 3 times what I usually paid. I figured it was the AC. It was a brutal summer, 106 for a week straight, and I told myself the unit must be running itself to death trying to keep an empty house cool. I made a note to have somebody look at it. Then a load fell through, and I had to deadhead 200 miles to pick up a reefer in Lubbock, and I forgot all about it. It was the homeowners association that finally got my attention, and I never thought I'd be grateful to those people for anything. Our neighborhood has an HOA, the kind that sends you a letter if your grass gets above 6 inches or you leave your trash cans at the curb too long. I'd had run-ins with them before, over the crepe myrtle of all things, so when I saw an email from the association management company while I was fueling up near Childress, my first reaction was annoyance. Then I read the subject line. It said, "Inquiry regarding commercial use of residential property, 229 Quail Hollow Drive." That was my address. I read the whole thing sitting on the running board of my truck, with the diesel pump still ticking behind me. The property manager, a woman named Brenda from the management company, wrote that several residents had filed complaints about repeated gatherings at my home, people coming and going on weekday mornings, cars lining both sides of the street. One neighbor had reported seeing what looked like a delivery of folding banquet tables being carried in through the garage on a Tuesday. Brenda wrote that under the covenanters operating a business from a residence required board approval, and she needed me to respond and explain the nature of the activity. Banquet tables. On a Tuesday, while I was somewhere between Roswell and the Texas line with a trailer full of frozen poultry, my first thought was that someone had broken in. But that didn't track. You don't break into a house to set up banquet tables. My second thought, the worst one, was that someone I knew was using my place, and the only people who'd ever had a key were my kids and an ex-wife who wouldn't have crossed the street to spit on me if I were on fire. I sat there running the math, and none of it added up. And the longer I sat, the colder I got, the way you do when you realize the ground under you isn't where you thought it was. I had a load to deliver. That's the part nobody who works a normal job understands. I couldn't just drop everything and drive home. I had perishable freight under contract and a delivery window in Oklahoma City, and if I abandoned it, I'd be out of load and possibly out of contract. So I drove. I delivered. And the whole 11 hours I kept thinking about banquet tables in my living room. I want to say something here about what I did next, because this is the part people argue with me about. The obvious move, the one everybody brings up, is to call a locksmith and change the locks. Just kill the access right then, problem solved. I thought about it. I thought about it hard, somewhere around Vernon at 3 in the morning. But here's what stopped me. Whoever was doing this had been doing it long enough to rack up an electric bill 3 times my normal. Long enough for the neighbors to notice a pattern. Long enough to feel comfortable hauling furniture in broad daylight. This wasn't a one-time thing. And if I changed the locks, all I'd accomplish was tipping them off. They'd vanish, and I'd never know who they were, and I'd spend the rest of my life flinching every time I pulled into my own driveway. I'd been a witness in a workers' comp case years back, and the company lawyer told me something that stuck. The difference between a complaint and a conviction is evidence, and evidence you can't unsee. I wanted to be able to unsee somebody, so I made a decision that I knew sounded crazy even as I made it. I was going to find out who these people were before I shut the door on them. I called the non-emergency police line first. The officer was polite and patient and completely useless through no fault of his own. He explained that since there was no sign of forced entry, and since I couldn't even confirm a crime was in progress, the most they could do was send a car by, and if the house looked empty, that'd be the end of it. If somebody had a key, he said, it got complicated fast. Sometimes it became a civil matter, sometimes a tenant dispute, and I could end up having to evict people from my own home. He told me, almost as an aside, that if I really wanted something done, I should document everything. Times, dates, faces, license plates. Give us a case we can actually file, he said. That stuck with me too. I rolled into Mansfield 2 days later, but I didn't go home. I checked into a Comfort Inn off the highway, the kind of place with a waffle machine and a parking lot full of work trucks, and I paid cash and used my middle name on the registration like some kind of fugitive in my own town. Then I drove to a Best Buy, and I bought 4 wireless cameras and a video doorbell, the type that run off Wi-Fi, and back everything up to the cloud. And I bought a cheap motion sensor for the back gate too. I spent $400 I didn't really want to spend, and I sat in the parking lot reading the setup instructions like I was studying for a test. The next part I had to time carefully. I waited until a Sunday because every report Brenda had passed along mentioned weekday activity, and Sunday felt like my safest bet for an empty house. I parked 3 streets over and walked up the alley to my own back gate, feeling like a burglar casing my own home, and I let myself in through the yard. The grass was high. The crepe myrtle had dropped blossoms all over the patio. Everything looked, from the outside, exactly like the house of a man who was never there. Inside is where it got bad. I unlocked my own back door and stepped into my own kitchen, and I stopped dead because it was clean. Not the kind of clean I leave. I'm a wipe the counter and call it good man. This was scrubbed. The sink was empty and dry. There was a roll of paper towels on the counter, a brand I don't buy, the expensive kind, with the cloth-like texture. The trash can had a fresh liner in it, and there was a smell, a faint citrus cleaning product smell, the kind you get in a hotel room or a rental, and underneath it, something else. Coffee. Like somebody had brewed a pot that morning. I opened my refrigerator, and there were 2 bottles of a flavored sparkling water I'd never bought in my life, and a half-and-half creamer, and a Tupperware container of something with a little label written in handwriting that wasn't mine. I stood there with the cold air spilling out of the fridge, and I felt the back of my neck go tight. Somebody had been living a whole life in my house. Not a break-in. A life. They'd been keeping creamer for their coffee. I went room by room. In the living room, my recliner had been pushed back against the wall and my couch had been turned to face the other direction, opening up the middle of the floor. There were two folding chairs I'd never seen leaning in the corner by the bookshelf. The coffee table had water rings on it, a whole scatter of them, pale, overlapping circles where a dozen cups had sat and sweated. I have never once in my life used a coaster, so I'm not going to pretend I'm precious about the table. But these weren't my rings. These belonged to strangers. The little half bath off the hall had a hand soap dispenser on the sink that wasn't mine, a fancy one, and a folded stack of those small decorative towels, the kind you're not supposed to actually dry your hands on, the kind my ex used to put out when company came. That's the detail that got me standing in my own half bath. The decorative towels. Because it meant somebody wanted this place to look nice for guests. Somebody was proud of it. I set up the cameras that afternoon. One on the bookshelf in the living room aimed at the front door, half hidden behind a dusty trophy my son won in middle school that I'd never had the heart to throw away. One on top of the kitchen cabinets pointed down at the room. One in the hallway. One over the back door. The doorbell went up out front, and then I did the hardest thing, which was to put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. The chairs in the corner, the couch turned wrong, the creamer in the fridge. I wiped my own fingerprints off the doorknobs out of some half-formed paranoia, and I let myself back out through the yard and drove to the Comfort Inn. And I lay on top of the covers in my boots, and I did not sleep. The doorbell camera woke me at 7:52 the next morning. A white panel van had pulled up to the curb out front. A man and a woman got out. They went around back, opened the van, and started carrying in folding tables. Long ones, the gray plastic kind you see at church potlucks. They had a key to my front door. They let themselves in like they'd done it 100 times, because of course they had. I watched the whole thing on my phone, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed with my heart going like a jackhammer, and I had to physically stop myself from getting in the truck and driving over there and kicking the door in. The officer's voice was in my head. Give us a case we can actually file. By 9, there were 9 people in my house. I watched them on the living room camera. They set up the folding tables in a U shape. They brought in a little projector and a screen on a stand. They put out a tray of pastries in one of those big airpot coffee dispensers, and they laid little name tents along the tables. A woman in a blazer stood at the front clicking through slides. It was a meeting. A real, professional, corporate-looking meeting. 8 people taking notes and 1 running the presentation. In my living room, on a Monday morning, while I sat 3 miles away watching it on a phone with a complimentary hotel coffee going cold beside me. At one point, somebody told a joke and the whole room laughed, and I watched these 9 strangers laughing in my house, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. It wasn't just anger. It was the specific sickness of being erased from your own life. They were gone by 2 in the afternoon. They folded the tables, packed the projector, wiped down the kitchen counters, ran a little cordless vacuum over the carpet. They left my house cleaner than they found it. The woman in the blazer walked through every room turning off lights, the way you do when you're closing up a place you're responsible for. And then she locked my front door behind her with my key and drove away. That night, I started searching. I typed my address into every short-term rental site I could think of, Airbnb, VRBO, the rest, nothing. Then I got smarter about it and started searching for what I'd actually seen. Even Space Rental, Mansfield, Texas. Meeting Space, Arlington. Private Venue Rental, DFW. It took me most of a night and a lot of dead ends, but I found it on a site I'd never heard of. A platform that rents out private homes by the hour for meetings and photo shoots and small parties. And there was my house. My living room in the photos. My kitchen. My backyard with the crepe myrtle which the listing described, and I swear this is true, as a charming, mature flowering tree. The place was advertised as a bright, flexible suburban gathering space at $75 an hour, 3-hour minimum. 23 reviews. Every single one of them 5 stars. I read those reviews until my eyes burned. Perfect for our quarterly planning session. Host was so accommodating, easy check-in, clean space. We'll definitely book again for our next workshop. The host. They kept calling whoever did this the host. One review from a few months back thanked someone by name. It said, "Big thanks to the host for letting us run a little long, really flexible." And another one, older, said, "Cody made check-in a breeze." Cody. I wrote that name down on a hotel notepad, and I underlined it twice. I went back through the camera footage from the morning, frame by frame, until I caught a clear look at the man who'd come the next day to reset the house, because somebody had to be managing the place between bookings, restocking the creamer, refilling the soap, straightening the chairs. There he was, just past noon on Wednesday, letting himself in alone with a key. Late 30s, ball cap, a polo shirt with a little embroidered logo on the chest. I screenshotted it and zoomed in until it pixelated, and I could just make out the shape of it, a stylized roofline with a little wrench underneath. I ran image searches half the night before I matched it to a local outfit called Trinity Home Care Services, a handyman and house cleaning company that worked the southern suburbs. And then it came back to me, the way these things do, all at once and a little too late. 2.5 years earlier, before a long run, I'd had a busted water heater. I'd called a company to come fix it while I was on the road, and I'd left a key in a lockbox on the hose bib and given them the code so they could let themselves in and do the work. They'd fix the heater. I paid the invoice. And I'd never once thought about that key again. It had a key in the world, a copy of my house key, floating around in the possession of a company I'd used exactly one time, and I'd just forgotten about it the way you forget a receipt in a coat pocket. I dug through my old emails until I found the invoice. The technician who'd done the job was listed by first name and last initial. Cody R. I called Trinity Home Care the next day and asked for a manager, and I made up a story about wanting to hire them for a remodel. Just fishing. The woman who answered confirmed, without me even pushing, that they had a Cody Renfro who used to do contract work for them, but who'd left the company about a year back. Left the company. So this wasn't even sanctioned by anybody. This was one man, a former handyman, who'd kept a copy of a key from a job 2.5 years ago and quietly turned my house into a rental property while I hauled frozen chicken across 4 states. That was the moment I should have felt triumphant, I guess. I'd found him, but instead the detective I finally got through to asked me a question that knocked the wind out of me. Her name was Detective Anna Castellano, Mansfield PD, and when I came in with my laptop and a folder of printed screenshots, she walked through all of it with me carefully, nodding, taking notes, and at the end she leaned back and said, "Mr. Tillman, this is a lot of good work. You've basically built the case for us. Trespass, theft of services, probably fraud depending on what he told these renters about whose house it was." And then she said, "Have you pulled your credit lately?" I hadn't. Not in years. Why would I? I sat in my hotel room that night and pulled my credit report. My stomach dropped to the floor. There were 2 hard inquiries I didn't recognize, both from the same week back in the spring. One from a store credit card, one from an online lender. Neither had turned into an open account, which meant somebody had applied in my name and been denied, but somebody had applied. Somebody sitting in my house with my mail coming to my address with God knew what paperwork from my home office had tried to take out credit as me. That was different from the rest of it. The tables, the strangers, the creamer in my fridge, all of that was a violation, a gross one, but it was about the house. This was about me. This was somebody reaching into my actual life and trying to wear my name like a coat. I called Detective Castellano first thing in the morning and told her, and she went quiet for a second and then said, "Okay. That changes the size of this." It took them about 3 weeks. Castellano and a financial crimes investigator pieced it together with my footage and their own work. Cody Renfro had been running the operation for the better part of a year. He'd made the listing himself with photos he took of my house. He'd been collecting every payment through a payment app tied to his own account. They put the total at a little over $19,000, none of which, I'll add for the folks who always ask, had been reported to the IRS, which the investigator told me would be its own separate headache for Mr. Renfro down the line. He'd had help too. A woman he was seeing, who handled the messages and the reviews and the booking calendar, kept that 5-star rating polished, answered all the questions from people booking baby showers and team offsites in my living room. She'd never set foot in the place. She'd just made money off it from her couch. The credit applications had come from my home's internet connection, on days I could prove from my truck's logs and fuel receipts that I was 1,000 miles away. That's the thing about this job. Every fuel stop, every delivery, every hour is documented somewhere. The same record-keeping that makes trucking feel like working inside a machine turned out to be the thing that nailed down exactly where I was and wasn't. They executed the warrant on a Thursday morning, picked Renfro up at his apartment, arrested the girlfriend at her office the same day. The listing came down within hours of his arrest. I was standing in the parking lot of a Boosie's outside Temple, of all places, halfway through a run, when Castellano called to tell me it was done. I remember I bought a brisket sandwich and sat in the cab and couldn't eat it. Renfro was charged with criminal trespass, theft of services, and fraud, with the attempted identity theft stacked on top once the financial crime side wrapped up. They found 3 more credit attempts I hadn't even located, all denied, all from my address. The girlfriend got hit with fraud and conspiracy. My lawyer, meanwhile, went after Trinity Home Care in civil court for the way they'd handled keys to clients' homes, for having no system to track who had what. We settled out of court 8 months later, and I agreed not to say the number, but it covered my legal bills, a whole new security system, new locks, and a good chunk of what this thing cost me in time and sleep. The rental platform updated their policy after their lawyers got involved, started requiring proof that you actually own or have the right to rent a property before you can list it. Cody Renfro took a plea and got 20 months in state jail and 5 years probation. The girlfriend got probation and restitution. I sat in that courtroom for the plea, and I kept waiting to feel good. It never came. What I felt mostly was tired, and underneath the tired was a sadness I hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with. Here's the thing. I never told the detective or the lawyer or even my kids. Not really. I bought that house to prove something. After the divorce, after all the years of being the dad who was always one state over, the husband who chose the road, I told myself this little brick ranch was going to be the one thing I got right. My choices, my furniture, my crepe, myrtle planted too close to the foundation and kept there out of pure spite. It was supposed to be proof that a man who'd failed at the big things could still own one small thing completely, and strangers had sat in it laughing. They put out decorative towels for guests. They'd left 5-star reviews for a host who never had any right to exist. I sold the house. I know some people think that's letting them win, and maybe it is. But I couldn't walk into that living room without seeing it set up in a U shape. I couldn't open the fridge without looking for creamer that wasn't mine. I bought a place in a secured building near the airport instead. Key fob access, a front desk with somebody at it day and night, cameras of my own inside the unit. I gave a spare key to exactly one person, my daughter, and she keeps it in a drawer in Frisco and has never once needed it. I changed the locks the day after the arrest, by the way. The day I no longer needed access to be a trap. There's a small, stubborn satisfaction in waiting to do the obvious thing until it's actually the right thing. I think about it on the long stretches now, somewhere out past Abilene, where there's nothing but mesquite and tank batteries and the road going dead straight to the curve of the earth. I always knew the job took something. The marriage, the holidays and truck stop diners, the grandkids who have to check a calendar to know when grandpa's around. I made my peace with that a long time ago. What I never understood until somebody took it from me was how much I'd come to lean on the simple idea of a home that just waited, unchanged, holding everything exactly where I left it. Turns out that mattered more than I ever said out loud. Maybe more than I ever let myself know. So if you spend your life away from your house, if you trust a lock and a mortgage to keep what's yours, let me tell you what I wish somebody had told me. A locked door is not a system. There are patient people out there who study the gaps in the things we take for granted, and they are betting that you are too busy and too far away to look closely. Watch your bills, even the boring ones. Know every key that exists to your home and who is holding it. Talk to your neighbors, the nosy ones especially, and the first time something small is off when you walk in, a mat that isn't yours, a smell that's wrong, a chair where no chair should be, do not tell yourself you're imagining it. Stop right there and pay attention. The small thing that doesn't add up is almost never small. It's just the part of the story you're allowed to see first. I've had a lot of miles to chew on this since the day they took Cody Renfro out of his apartment in handcuffs, and the conclusion I keep landing on is simpler than I expected. Everything that happened to me happened because of a door I left open, and not the one with the lock on it. I left a key in the world and stopped thinking about it. I let bills slide past me unread. I told myself that being gone was just the cost of the job, and I never asked what that absence was costing, the one thing I claimed to care about most. None of this fell out of the sky. It was the slow, quiet result of small choices I made and small choices I failed to make, stacked up over years until a stranger could walk into my living room and call himself the host. But the same chain of cause and effect cut the other way too, and that's the part I want a man hearing this to hold on to. The reason Renfro is sitting in a state jail instead of still collecting $75 an hour off my crepe myrtle is that when the ground went out from under me, I made myself slow down instead of speeding up. Everything in me wanted to drive over there and kick the door in. The honest part of me, the part that refused to let those people just vanish unpunished, told me that walking away wasn't an option. The thinking part of me understood that rage with no evidence behind it is just the man handing the other side a victory. And the stubborn part, the part that sat in a comfort inn for nights I'll never get back, watching strangers laugh in my house and not moving, that's the part that actually won it. Doing right, thinking clearly, and refusing to quit aren't three separate things. They're one rope, and you need all three strands or it snaps under load. I think that's what I'd say to anybody who feels like the road, whatever their road is, has slowly carried them away from their own life. You don't get your home back by being the angriest man in the room. You get it back by being honest about what you let happen, smart about what you do next, and tough enough to wait for the right moment instead of the loud one. I planted that crepe myrtle too close to the foundation and kept it there out of spite. And for years I thought that was just stubbornness. Now I think stubbornness is only a flaw until the day it's the only thing holding you steady. I lost the house. I didn't lose myself. And on the long, empty stretches out past Abilene, when there's nothing but mesquite and the road running straight at the curve of the earth, that's the trade I've finally made my peace with.